Hello everyone and welcome to Makai-World Reviews. Your favorite demon is back with, well, more reviews of course. If you don't know, that's me, the Tona Makai, Master of Minds and of Men. We're going to continue looking at movies with potentially, more famous remakes. Last week we looked at The Crazies by one George Romero. This week we're going to head towards the south a little bit. We'll be taking a glance at 310 to Yuma. So go ahead and hit subscribe and like if you want to, and let's get to that midday train. Like I said, the movie is 310 to Yuma, directed by Delmer Davies, a director, actor, writer of some considerable success. Here with a lot of famous people, your Bogies, your Gary Coopers, Jimmy Stewarts, etc. But to be frank, most of his movies he did were old-timey westerns that I've not really seen. Sans this movie, and I think maybe one or two other ones. So I don't have a ton more to say about him. Who wrote this? Well, this is based on a short story by one Elmore Leonard, whom a number of his works got adaptations like Get Shorty, and a number of stories being used in the TV series Justified, which I've never seen, among others. Starring one Glenn Ford, a famous actor and Quebecois. If you've seen a movie from the late 30s to the late 80s, you might have seen Mr. Ford. Though they were never the big spotlight films, he was a workhorse of an actor that brought a gravitas to every role. He also legally raised chickens for a period of time. So, there's that factoid for you. And a Van Heflin, real name Emmett, but Van Heflin sort of rolls off the tongue a little better. His mom's name was Fanny, and boy, they don't name people Fanny anymore. I want to see that make a comeback. He was one of my favorite westerns, Shane, a beautiful movie I'm definitely going to review sometime. He was also noted for his role in Johnny Eager, which is a good film in and of itself. Release date for this was August 7th, 1975. What came out around the same time? Band of Angels. Clark Gable stars in this slavery-era romance story. It's a pretty standard love story with an exceeding amount of racial, not undertones, but overtones that don't really land for me. But it does handle the subject matter, I think, about as sensitively as you might imagine back then, and not necessarily in a negative way. And Fire Down Below, not to be confused with the Steve Seagal movie where he lumbers around in rural Kentucky, which was nominated for 4 Razzies in 1997. This one actually has a good cast with Robert Mitchum, Jack Lemmon, and Rita Hayworth about a love triangle and a boat on fire. Pretty good. So let's talk about the plot. We come upon some cowpokes leading their cattle along a drive. But wait, these aren't cowboys. Why, it's Ben Wade and his gang, robbing one stagecoach of a Mr. Butterfield. A few things happen during this robbery. Well, one of Ben's men gets held hostage by the stagecoach driver, so Ben kills his own man and the hostage taker. Also, one Dan Evans, whose cattle the men had stolen to pretend to be cowboys, comes upon the scene with his 2 boys. They are noticed right away, though thankfully, besides the 2 men and Butterfield's gold, no one else is harmed, though Wade does take everyone's horse, but releases them near enough to town. Well, Dan and his boys lead their cattle back home and tell Alice, his wife, what happened, and she laments their long-suffering farm, which has had some drought problems. Before Dan takes off to get Butterfield a horse, get his horses back, and contact the local sheriff. Meanwhile, in town, Wade's men arrive to have a few drinks and politely leer at the attractive barmaid Emmy. Wade says he and his men are cattle drivers and tells Emmy she needs to inform the sheriff there was a robbery and a murder. Well, the sheriff questions Wade and his men, but seems relieved when they begin leaving town, besides Ben, who is sticking around for a moment. The sheriff leaves to round up a posse comitatus and figure out what is going on. And, of course, Ben and Emmy, well, they get it on. While the coitus is happening, the sheriff, local drunkard Alex Potter, and a few others meet up with Dan and Mr. Butterfield, where Dan tells the sheriff it was Ben Wade and his men, and they were headed to town. Well, they finally put 2 and 2 together and figure out the men who had just left were Ben's men. Thankfully, they are able to get the drop on Ben, and he's captured, though Charlie, Ben's right-hand man, and his men are going to come back and free him, as they've done many other times before. Well, the sheriff comes up with a plan. Make Wade's men think they are going one way, but go another. And the place they are really going to is to the 310 train to Yuma prison. Butterfield knows it will be dangerous, so offers $200 to the men willing to be the ones that take Wade. This is where Alex and Dan come in. gladly taking the money and the responsibility. So the sheriff and company go off, looking like they are taking Wade one place, while Alex and Dan go to Dan's house with Wade in handcuffs. Here they have a tense but polite meal, though Dan's kids are god-awful, but I'll get to that later. Well, then the three of them are off to Contention City, where they are meeting Mr. Butterfield, and to wait at the local hotel while they're sitting for that fateful train. A suspicious man, who is obviously Charlie, sleeping in the hotel lobby, but no one seems to notice. Alex decides he's going to circle the town continuously just in case any of Wade's men show up, and Wade and Dan are holed up in the room, with Dan holding a shotgun on the charming ne'er-do-well. Wade begins making offers to Dan as well as taunts, knowing the thousands of dollars he's offering Dan could change his life, and Wade could just rob a bank to get more, so no big deal either. Well, another wrinkle shows up as the man Wade killed, the stagecoach driver, is being buried in Contention City, and the man's brother and his buddies are none too happy with Mr. Butterfield nor Wade. The brother tries to kill Wade, but Dan lays him out with a right hook and takes his gun. But the man fired it off while he was getting punched, and Charlie heard it, figuring out the whole gimmick, and he rides off to get his other men. This leads to the final part of the movie, with Dan feeling the heat on all sides, no one being willing to help in the coming shootout, and Alex being killed and hung by Charlie and his men. Though Dan does gun down one of Wade's men, showing his great aim. Alice also shows up, but she can't talk Dan out of ending the situation the way he promised. Wade's men surround the town, but in the end, Dan manages to get Wade on the train after killing Charlie, though not without Wade's help in getting on the train. Wade says Dan saved his life, and he doesn't like owing anyone any favors. He also says he's broken out of Yuma prison before, but Dan doesn't care. He did his part, and really, there was no hard feelings had between the two. Alright, so let's get into this, starting with the directing. You can easily go into this movie thinking you're going to get a paint-by-numbers sort of cowboy fare, and you would be totally wrong. This is a tense, exciting, and reasonably brisk film. I've only seen this and maybe one or two other films by Delmer, as I mentioned before, and I genuinely think I'm gonna dig into his catalog, as he presented an incredibly human story here with some technically simple but effective directing. And, don't mock the fundamentals here, folks. Going to the cinematography, this movie looks great. The black and white is so stark. It's very bright, with only a little play of the shadows. But two particularly effective shadow usages was when Alex was hung, and you see the silhouette. It's shocking and presented as an evil deed. And of course, Wade himself, his face is almost always slightly covered by his hat in some way, giving him an air of mystery and mystique. Besides the sets and locations, they look great. They look lived in. The towns are run down. The people's houses are simple. They ain't got no money. We spend most of the time in the hotel, and it's nice, but it feels more and more cramped as the tension outside rises. I wish I had more criticism thus far, but really it makes use of every place they are in, no matter how simple they are. They would have liked to know the distance between the cities they were trying to present Wade as being at. How far are they from each other? It was a little vague to add much of the story, honestly. Talking of story, this is very much like how Ben Wade likes his steaks, fatless. There isn't much padding. It isn't overly long, only 92 minutes, a fairly average movie runtime, and it goes from one beat to another. It begins with the big robbery, and then just bam, town, bam, we got Wade, bam, we're at the hotel, and right to the third act. I was thinking the hotel scenes might be a little slow, but they gave you enough conversation, enough tension inside it out, and, how are we going to resolve this, that it didn't linger. The tightness of the movie was almost a negative, as you don't get enough of some of the interactions I would have liked. But I'm going to go over that when I talk about characters themselves. As far as the concept, it's kind of an interesting take in that there really isn't a ton of ill will between any of the main characters, save Butterfield and Wade. But Dan and Ben, they almost get along. And I think that does hurt the tension a little bit. The stakes are only middling. Yeah, you could get killed, but you could also let this guy go at any time, and what would it really matter? I wouldn't have minded a little more build-up between Dan, Wade, Charlie, and Alex, etc. Let's move on to the characters, starting with Ben Wade. Easily, and by a long shot, the best character in the movie. Glenn Ford is the most charming bad guy, and even used bad guy slightly loosely for reasons I'll get into in movie history. You can't help but like him. He's got this odd morality, this polite, quiet demeanor. this rugged charm. Yeah, he breaks the law, but he also wants things to end as quickly, easily, and as mutually as possible for a guy like this. He kills the stagecoach driver and his own man, but gives his man a good burial and demands that Butterfield do the same for the stagecoach driver, which we actually see in the movie, and it is a nice funeral. He takes everyone's horses but releases them safely and gives Dan his cattle back. He romances Emmy, and while he is honest, he tells her, I can't stick around, darling. He tells her he'll send her some pearls. And by God, I believe him. This is a perfect scoundrel you can't help but love. He makes sure he is polite to Alice, despite her and Dan's boys being rude. He never really threatens Dan directly, totally. He offers him money, a partnership, anything, just to let this all end simply, though he knows and doesn't mind that his men will kill Dan and anyone else in the way. He's got that coldness to him, with murder being an extension of his job, he seems to think. Not even being shocked with Alex was being hung. He simply thinks, well, there could have been another way, a complex character than you might have expected. Moving to Dan Evans, Van Heflin himself, and I have a question to pose first. Does he not have eyebrows in this movie? I know he has them in real life. I've seen him in other things. But he looks like he doesn't have eyebrows in this. Am I wrong? It was very off-putting and distracting. Beyond that, Dan was okay. I didn't love him. I was kind of confused by him, to be honest. He's presented as needing money because his farm is failing, and that makes sense, and that's why he takes on the job to get Wade to the train. But then why not take the money Wade is offering? It's a lot more, up to $10,000. It's not like we see Dan being an incredibly moral man, and he has to do the right thing. I guess that's what we're supposed to think. That's not really what we see. He's presented as down on his luck and just looking to help his family. Okay, well, this doesn't really do that when you could easily let this guy go, a guy will break out of prison at the end, and don't seem to care about when that comes up, and be up on the deal. I don't know, his acting is good, but I don't really understand nor care about his story arc because it's only dangerous for him because he makes it that way. Maybe my morals are all wrong here, but Ben would have been a free man if it was me, easily. Though he does have a line I really liked. He was talking about his farm and how they've had a bad drought. And he goes, all this will be green in 6 months. Cattle will be fat. Maybe you and me won't be so tired all the time. In 6 months, we'll be happy, won't we? We move over to Dan's family, Alice and the tow-headed kids. These characters kind of suck. Alice is long-suffering, to say the least. She's not particularly kind to Dan. She even kind of eggs him on about not doing enough when first encountering Ben at the beginning. It's made her instantly dislikable to me, and she then abandons her kids to go right into the heart of the matter in Contention City for seemingly no reason to talk Dan out of it. I don't really know why she came, just for some added tension, some faux tension. And the kids were insufferable and rude, but I try not to be too hard on child actors. They were just there as filler. Mr. Butterfield and Alex Potter, both characters that could have used a lot more fleshing out. They start as kind of one-note characters, and mostly the same, with some progress. They're not enough to make either of them endearing. Mr. Butterfield is a guy who owns stagecoaches, which is why him and Wade come to blows, and offers the money to Dan and Alex, and he tries to get men to rally around them, but they don't want a shootout, obviously, though he does stand with Dan until near to the very end, which he gives up right before actually having to get Wade to the train, but I give him credit for making it that far. He also offers to pay Dan the money, even if he lets Wade go. Dan, take it, double dip, get the 10 grand from Wade and the 200 from Mr. Butterfield. Take the money and run off. RUNNOFT. To Alex, who should have been a lot more interesting than he was. He has the best potential story arc in the movie besides Wade. He starts as the town drunk, saying things like, I never touch a drop till the stroke of noon. But he longs to be more. He doesn't want to be seen as a loser. He absolutely is. He signs up with Butterfield to make a difference. Thanks to Dan, he doesn't drink at Dan's house, though he does ask one of the boys to sneak him some booze, though there's no booze to be had. By the time they get to Contention City, he says he doesn't want to drink, and he just rides around the town doing nothing until he gets hung. The hanging would have been more effective had we spent more time with Alex, saw he was becoming a better person, and not just these kind of shallow things we see. To Charlie and Emmy, the best looking people in the movie, and one a definite lover of Wade, the other a potential lover. Emmy, man, Felicia Farr, she's staggeringly beautiful. with a gentle, world-weary sweetness to her. Her and Wade have so much chemistry together, and it's a shame we don't get more out of them. I really enjoyed seeing these two interact, and I hope she gets her pearls, honestly. She's married to Jack Lemmon from 1962 until his death, and I hope they had a good marriage. Now, the real villain, Charlie Prince, Richard Jekyll, good looking, tan. You got these big white teeth, piercing eyes, slick back blonde hair, leather gloves. This man stood out against everyone else in the movie. He was cold, efficient, did whatever Wade needed to, right up until it got him killed. I would have liked more of this character. He was intriguing and dangerous. I'm not actually saying him and Wade had something going on, but I don't know. There's something about this guy that makes me think he liked Ben more than Ben liked him, in whatever capacity that takes. Talking about the soundtrack was decent enough. It had one of those things I miss in movies. It had a theme song. Beyond that, it helped build some of the tension, but honestly, didn't really add much to it. It's competent and never distracting, but it's only mildly, did anything for the film. This film was being carried by its pace and acting. It's a hearty, sort of standard soundtrack for the time, but nothing stands out to me that makes it great. It's there, fine. As far as a comparison to the remake, this one is less cut and dry than I found the others. While I kind of gave a push to Cape Fear due to the radical differences in those movies, and I like the original Crazies better, I'm not sure about this one. I think the directing of James Mangold was great in the remake. I like him as a director. And Russell Crowe and Christian Bale did a lot with their roles, as you might expect. Those two are great actors. But frankly, it was Ben Foster's Charlie that gave the remake a slight edge. He had a lot more to do and embrace that cruel right-hand man role. So yeah, I think I would give the remake a slight edge. Overall, this is a movie I'd recommend. If you've not seen it, it's not a long movie. It's not a boring movie. And it's a fun watch with more charm than you might expect. So yeah, I'd absolutely recommend this as a watch, though it's not without its negatives, and once you see it once, you kind of get the gimmick and probably won't need to revisit it after that. Hey, but one viewing's enough. Well, that was 310 to Yuma, and if you're listening this far, you made it to the train on time, and I thank you for that. Do you have any movies from Delmer Davies I should take a look at? Let me know down below. Also, hit that like button because, you want to. And come back next week where I'm finishing up this month by looking at the original Ocean's 11. Ain't that a kick in the head? And don't forget, I'm the only demon who loves you. I don't care what the others say. Goodbye.